sheets, you can turn those to lesson 2. Turn those to lesson 2. We are examining this series of lessons where it's actually a 26-lesson series. I'm only going to do the first half of it, the first 13 lessons. There's a couple people that may have accidentally grabbed, my fault that you accidentally grabbed it, but I accidentally set a handful of the full 26 lessons back there on the table the other night. So if you happen to be one of the 3 people that grabbed that, and you hear me say 13 and you're looking at yours and you see 26, then 3 of you are going to be confused. But that'll be all right. You'll figure it out. But we're studying here these lessons about David as a man after God's own heart. We're trying to make sure we start by contrasting that to King Saul. Why is it that King Saul was not a man after God's own heart, that God would want to make a change in relationship to the reign over His people? We talked on Sunday morning about the fact that God really didn't even want to give him one. He didn't want to even give him a king, right? He warns him, you want a king because you want to look like all the other nations round about you, but because you're requesting this king, I'm warning you ahead, God says, it's going to be miserable. He's going to make your children serve him. He's going to take your money. It is not going to be a pleasant experience, and we're barely into the first king, right? We're barely into King Saul, and what happened? We're already experiencing what God told him was going to happen. We're already experiencing the difficulties and challenges that God had warned them that were going to hurt them. And so that's going to be the process as we move forward, trying to examine what isn't a man after God's own heart as it relates to Saul, what is a man after God's own heart as it relates to David, and some of the positive things that he did. And we'll kind of see all of that unfold as we move forward. I wasn't real sure. Sunday was kind of the trial mode for me as it relates to how I wanted to go about this study. I found out very quickly Sunday that I can't get bogged down in the academic side, if you will, if I want to talk about the practical applications. In other words, I'm going to have to trust you to, before each class, read the passages, read the history, understand what's going on so that I don't have to go back and do all of that. And then we look at the clock and we go, oh, no time to talk about what does that mean. And so I'm going to rely on you to go ahead and read those narratives and read those texts. And when we come into class, I'm going to jump straight to the questions. And so when we come into class, I'm just going to go straight to the questions. And assume you've read the paragraphs and read the texts that relate to it. And so open your lesson sheets up. If you have them, I'll show it to you on the screen as well. And I just want to jump right here to the first question, because we're dealing still with Saul and who else in particular in this moment? Jonathan. Who is he? All right, that's Saul's son. And not just Saul's son, but in the conversation as it relates to David, there's kind of 2 things you can think about. One is the fact that Jonathan and David were friends, despite the fact that who should have received the throne? John, right? Here's a rightful heir. Under the normal process of kingship, typically the heir receives the throne. And undoubtedly, Saul, throughout various thought processes, even in his early reign, would have thought to himself that I'm going to eventually have an opportunity to pass this on to my son. And then the facts come out, and his failures in relationship with God teach him very quickly that that's not going to occur. And Jonathan's going to kind of learn that along the way as well, but it doesn't seem to affect his character. Even though that some sons would have been very upset about that and frustrated with it, and maybe even would have joined their father in trying to stop the process of David ultimately becoming king. That wasn't Jonathan's mindset. In fact, here in this narrative in 1 Samuel chapter 13, we're going to find that Jonathan's a man of good character and a quality servant, and even one who honors God in connection to those things. And so here in the 13th chapter of 1 Samuel, there's several things that I think we can take a look at. And again, I'm assuming you've kind of read the storyline about how he's going to fight the Philistines and kind of climbs up between those 2 cliffs, and he kind of has to go up to the garrison. What's a garrison, by the way? It's strongholds. It's a military post, okay? It's generally wherever the military force is gathered together, that would be considered a garrison. So the Philistines would have a garrison where their military is gathered together. The Israelites would have had a garrison where they had kind of encamped and gathered together. And Jonathan decides one night that he and who are going to go check out these Philistines. He and his armor bearer. Nobody else. Just he and his armor bearer. We're going to go see about these Philistines and what we can encounter as it relates to them. And so Saul and Jonathan in some ways are very different. Saul becomes very kind of consumed with his own mindset of what he wants to do, and he even will step out of relationship with God to do that. And Jonathan seems to want to stay in step with the Creator in relationship to those things. And in fact, he takes great risk here to go and serve the Lord in taking on these Philistines. There's a key phrase that's made in verse 6. You know what? And I think it's in the questions as well. But he said making sure I have this right. But he says, nothing restrains the Lord from saving by what? Many or what? Yeah, many or few. Few or many. Nothing constrains the Lord in relationship to these things. Few or many, He is able to honor or take care of those things, irregardless of how many they happen to have available to them. So who do you trust if you're going into battle? You trust the Lord. It doesn't matter whether you get a lot of folks or a few folks. You trust the Lord. Jonathan's a man of character and recognizing the benefits of that mindset. So the question is asked then, and I'll give you a chance, and I'll try to step out of the way a little bit here. But in this conversation, and I actually should send you to chapter 14. This started at the end of chapter 13 and ended chapter 14. But so if you trust the Lord, there's no restraint, and you show that confidence in God, you can work through those challenges. Notice, I'm sorry, I keep flipping pages too soon, trying to read my own notes. But notice verses 9 and 10 with me as we just kind of move through this text. If they say thus unto us, tarry until we come to you, talking about those Philistines, then we will stand still in our place and will not go up unto them. But if they say that thus, come up unto us, then we will go up for what? The Lord hath delivered them into our hand, and this shall be a sign unto us. And both of them discovered themselves unto the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. So here's Jonathan and his armor bearer. That's it. And they make this decision. Jonathan makes this decision that we're going to use their reaction to our letting them know we're here as a determination of whether God would want us to move forward and deal with them or whether He would want us to retreat. And so they acknowledge that we're there. And what do the Philistines tell them? Come on up, right? Come on up. And they're concerned because they see these two coming up out of what would appear to be a hole between these two rocks. And if you're assuming there's two, you're probably assuming what? That there's more. The Philistines assume that because here comes two up out of this hole, that there's probably more, that they've been laying in wait in this hiding place between these rocks, and now that we've kind of encamped right beside this area, now here they come. So come on up. And so they go, and you can continue to read that narrative and see that Jonathan and his armor bearer have quite a victory. 20 men at one point there take on successfully initially. And then as they further the cause in battle, they continue to press forward. But Jonathan reigns victorious through all of that. But what's interesting is they go, who knows that they've left? Nobody, right? They haven't told anybody. Saul doesn't know they've left. None of the other men know that they've left. They've left the camp of the Israelites without anybody else knowing who it is. And so the Israelites are off in the distance, and they look over to the Philistines' garrison, and what do they see? Okay, what appears to be a battle. The trouble is there's only two combatants, right? But what had happened? They begin to turn what? Against one another. Have we seen that before, or will we see that? We've seen that before, right? Where did we see that? What jumps out at you? All right, that's Gideon, right? That's Judges 7. With Gideon, that was the same kind of thing, where there were thousands to fight, but they only took 300 men with them. And the man that got killed actually scared that encampment so much of the Midianites that they began to turn their weapons on each other because they didn't know where the battle was coming from and assumed everybody was an enemy. That seems to be what's happening here. When you trust that God can do great things with a few, great things can happen. But if you use the fact that, well, there's just two of us, and there's undoubtedly no way we can have any great success here, and so why do anything? Then nothing will ever get accomplished. And Jonathan takes great courage to go up here and bring the battle to the Philistines, even despite the fact that he doesn't have any great numbers with him. And then as the Israelites look across, they see all the challenge that's being brought to the Philistines. And as they turn upon one another, I think you can see that as they tremble and turn against each other in verses 15 through 17. Why don't you think Saul was pressing the battle?
A lot of his army was hid in the caves and the rocks and behind the trees and everything else.
It seems like Jonathan, of the two, he's the forward thinker. He's the active thinker of the two. And whether he's impatient, I don't know how to qualify his decision to just him and the armor bearer go up here and deal with this. But it is interesting that the father, the leader, the king, is sitting back while the younger, the son, is pressing the cause forward. Sometimes you have to overcome the difficulties of a lack of desire on some part to go and take care of the work that needs to be done. Go ahead, Randy.
Saul already exhibited a lack of faith and trust in God in the fact when he was dealing with the Amalekites, and he was supposed to utterly slay them and do everything like that, like God wanted, and he didn't do it.
Yeah.
He let the people change his mind. He didn't have the strength and conviction of character to do what God said. Yeah.
And maybe that's a practical implication that we can understand here. Saul had very much a mindset of whatever the people wanted, I'm going to cater to that. And he finds himself continually kind of giving in to what the people think they want in relationship to various things. Jonathan realizes that he and God, it was enough. Sometimes in our own lives, we've got to decide whether I'm going to break connection to the crowd and say, God and I alone is sufficient to take care of what's in front of me. That the cause and purposes that are before me, regardless of whether the crowd comes, regardless of whether the whole of the army of the Israelites goes, Jonathan says, I'm going. And he goes on and takes on the Philistines. Sometimes we need to build the kind of faith and confidence in God that takes on what's before us solely by the strength that God provides for us, and not be overly consumed as to whether or not others came along with us or the uncertainties that others might be bringing to bear in connection to those things. So jump to question 2 and move forward in the narrative. So he asked the question, the worksheet, explain Saul's rash vow, its self-centeredness and disastrous results. So I want you to tell me the history real quick, but then I want us to think about what we might learn from that. And so Saul decides that he's going to go in and fight finally, and he doesn't want his men to do what? Don't eat nothing. We're going to fight, right? He's filled with pride. He's determined this is the way he's going to accomplish it, and he's told his men, don't eat anything until we go and take care of these things. Don't eat anything all day until he's taken vengeance on his enemies. And the problem with that is he limits the victory that he could have had. His pride in himself and his confidence in his own decision-making has led him now to make choices and decisions that hinder the work that he's actually trying to engage in. But it costs him more dearly than that. He said, says, let the man who what? Who eats? Yeah, let him be cursed. The problem is, who's missing? Jonathan and his armor bearer aren't there. So he makes this decree, this vow, nobody's to eat, and let any man who decides to eat, he's going to be cursed. And so he makes the vow, not recognizing that somebody very important to him, you would think, is not present. They look around the camp when they see that battle going on over there, and they try to figure out who is that's over there waging battle against the Philistines. But Jonathan is that one, he and his armor bearer, and so he's not present when Saul makes this vow of let any man become cursed if he eats anything until the victory is ours, until this day runs out. So what happens in verse 27? Okay, so there's this honey made available to them. And the men who are with Saul, they know the decree, they know the vow that Saul has made, so they refuse it. But Jonathan doesn't know it. And so he heard not when his father charged the people with the oath. Wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand and dipped it into an honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. There comes a moment here in this scene where Jonathan begins to realize, enlightened about what, by the way? Rephrase it. Enlightened about who? About his father. Yeah, I think that he's coming to a point. It's an interesting moment here where God's active, obviously, in this moment. But he's beginning to realize that his father isn't everything that he should be. In fact, the difficulties and challenges, they're going to come because of his father's decision-making. When I thought about practicing, and I hope you're doing this too as you work through these, write down practical things you think about. And one of the things that I thought about with Jonathan is that sometimes people do things and they don't know. Didn't know it. He didn't have any idea. And I think sometimes we need to be more patient at times with others because we just assume sometimes that people understand what a circumstance might be, or we assume that they'll understand the choices or decisions that are before them as they ought, and that's not always the case. Sometimes people do things and they didn't know. They didn't know it hurt your feelings. They didn't know it was offensive to you, or they didn't know they might even not have known it was sinful. There could be all kinds of things that ignorance can bring. And a level of patience sometimes is needed. The people are going to show respect to Jonathan because he didn't know. Because he had no idea what his father's decree was. And we'll see it later in the narrative. But sometimes people do wrong things when they're unaware. And a level of patience can be extended.
Right.
Yeah.
Not the same as
yeah.
what it says on that one.
Yeah, I think it's the same principle being shared. Notice verse 30. The text says, how much more if haply the people have eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found, for had there not been now a much greater slaughter among the Philistines. From a practical standpoint, here what he's saying is greater things could have been accomplished. From a congregational standpoint or from a church standpoint, the lesson for us simply is this. It's one thing to say, well, we got something done. It's another thing to say we got everything possible or as much possible done. Those are two different things. Yeah, did they go win some battles over some Philistines? Yeah, they went and had some success. They weren't slaughtered in the hands of the Philistines. They went out and had some success, but their success was limited because they were what? They're hungry. They're exhausted physically because they've been denied the very things that the body needs in order to go fight battles. And so Saul's decision, though it didn't create absolute failure, but it limited the scope of success of what the Israelites could do because he refused to give his men food. and put a vow or a curse over them if they disobeyed his order to not eat. We have to be careful sometimes that we acknowledge moments where there might be something hindering us from doing more. We might be doing some things, but there might be more that can be accomplished if we recognize here's a handful of circumstances or things that are hindering us, and we need to eliminate those so that we can do the fullness of what God would want from us.
He also led his men to sin because they were very hungry, and they got the cattle and stuff, and they were slaughtering it and eating some of it with the blood in it.
Yeah.
So the same thing would pertain to us today. Without lacking patience, we may cause somebody to really sin because you didn't really understand, nor did they.
And that's verse 32. They finally get there, and the people, notice it says the people flew upon the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slew them on the ground, and the people did eat them with the blood, which was forbidden within the law. And so Saul's decision put his men at such risk that they finally reached a point where after fighting, that they choose to disobey whom? God's law, because of what Saul did. Now, are they accountable for that? Yeah, they're accountable for that. Sure, they're accountable for that. They knew what the law said about eating the blood, and so they understood the law, or at least should have, and so they're going to be accountable to that. And so I'm not implying that Saul was the sole responsible one here, but it was his choice and decision that set the stage for this moment, where he allows for his army to become so famished that this is the response when they get their hands on some animals.
Do you think maybe they were too blaming Saul? So this is why we're so hungry, and this is why we're doing it, because of the Saul's fault.
Yeah.
And
there's another practical example for us then. That the issues happen sometimes, whereas then we begin to justify our actions because, well, if he hadn't done that, then we wouldn't have been forced to do this. And if we hadn't been forced to do this, they would not have been forced to do that. And that chain just keeps going and going. Yeah. And so we're excusing our own behaviors based on the failures of others. And Saul is the catalyst of that. Why is he not a man after God's own heart? Well, he's not only making personal choices that separates him from his relationship with God, but he's leading the people and putting them in circumstances where they too now are making choices in violation of the law of God. And so the lesson for us is we need to be careful that the things that we're doing and the choices we're making and the decisions that we make are not causing the same set of circumstances in the lives of others. And that we're not setting the stage not just for our own failure, but that others might follow that lead or puts them in a circumstance where they too make some poor choices and decisions.
Well, that was reported to Saul what they were doing, and Saul said, "You go kill your animal. You don't eat the blood." That was what was forbidden in Leviticus and Genesis.
Yeah. So he sets up the problem, then he gets mad at them when they do it. And that can happen sometimes as well. So moving forward, Saul is trying to decide whether he should continue to press the battle or not. And in verse 39, "For as the Lord liveth, which saveth Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But there was not a man among all the people that answered him." So he goes and inquires of the Lord whether they should press the battle, and he gets what? Nothing. He didn't get anything from God. He gets nothing. And so his thought processes are, if God doesn't answer me, I got a problem among the people. Somebody has what? Yeah, somebody's breached my covenant, my vow that I made. And he basically says, Even if it's who? Even if it's my own son. He makes the first vow unwisely. Nobody gets to eat until I'm vindicated. Now he gets upset because that seems to have caused a problem with him getting a response from God as to the next battle. And he says, I'm going to hold the person responsible for this, guilty of death, even if it's my own son. I'm going to hold him accountable. How'd they determine who it was? They cast lots. So they separate them. They send. He says, I'll set myself and my son over here, the people over there, and we'll cast lots to determine this. And the lot fell upon Jonathan. I thought about all of this as it relates to Saul and his lack of being a follower of God as he should be. And I thought about how often we compile problem on top of problem when we lose patience, when we don't stop and consider the magnitude of what I'm about to do. Saul really probably should have thought that. He should have thought it through before he demanded that his men not eat anything. He should have stopped and considered before he makes a vow that death is going to come to whoever it is that caused this problem for the people. And I don't care who the lot falls upon. You can almost feel the impatience and the lack of restraint in Saul. And now he's just put a death decree over who? His own son. It might behoove us from an application standpoint to maybe know the fullness of a circumstance before we start dishing out what we're going to do or what we're not going to do or how we're going to do it or who it's going to fall upon. Saul, his responses are not very guided and they're not very tempered by anything. And he's just compounding problem on top of problem because he's not thinking through his decisions. And it's going to affect him. So the people escape. Lot doesn't fall upon them. Saul says, verse 42, cast lots between me and Jonathan my son, and Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what thou hast done. And Jonathan told him and said, I did but taste a little honey with the end of the rod that was in mine hand. And lo, I must die. I've tried to read this and it's hard. It's hard for me in terms of trying to determine which way is he trying to argue. Is he saying this from just a matter of fact standpoint? This is the result of my conduct because you made the decree, you made the vow, you said whoever ate dies. Even though I didn't know it, I'm the one responsible, so I must die. Or is there more of a tone? And tone's hard sometimes when you're reading narrative. But is it more the idea of his almost inquiring, am I really going to have to die because I ate a little bit of honey off the tip of the rod that I stuck down into a honeycomb? That's kind of where I lean. That he seems to be almost inquisitive of his father. Really? You make this rash decision to tell everybody they're not allowed to eat. I didn't even hear the decree, but you're going to hold me accountable to it. What's interesting to me about that is that sometimes we can be guilty of the same thing. Where we try to hold people accountable to things that they didn't understand or know about. And we get upset with one another. And sometimes folks get angry with one another. Because, well, you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, or you didn't help me with this, or you didn't say anything about that. And the truth is, you didn't even know. You didn't even know what you were supposed to have done or not done. Or what. Jonathan here's really inquiring. Is he really? I'm going to die because of a little honey that I ate? In regards to a vow that you made that I didn't even know about. I think sometimes we can hold people accountable in much bigger ways than they should be held accountable. Sometimes we can make demands of one another that just are way beyond what should be expected, especially when somebody didn't even understand what the rule or the law was, or the command that had been given. And so be careful. Notice verse 44. And Saul answered, God do so and more also. Thanks, Dad. That's what I thought of when I read that. Thanks. Sounds wonderful. Lord, do whatever, that and more. Saul's out of control. Saul is so filled with pride about is he going to lose kingship and reign? He's so filled with pride in his desire to overcome and win these battles against the Philistines and everybody else. He is so consumed. And it's amazing. Because recall, did Saul even want to be king? No. Saul goes and does what when he initially is told he's going to be king? He goes to hide. Saul starts out so humble. Saul starts out, I'm from the tribe of what? I'm tribe of Benjamin. Why in the world are you coming to the tribe of Benjamin to pick a king? You know, if you're looking for a king, why would you come to the tiniest little tribe of Benjamin in order to find a king? That's how Saul starts. But it doesn't take him long to where he's reached this point, where he becomes so consumed with his own personal value and success that he's willing to make a decree that affects his son in a foolish way and then kind of just compile it by making another decree and then compile it when he looks his own son in the eye and say, God do so and more also, for thou shalt surely die. Have you ever set a course where you've got one of two options? You can either acknowledge that the course I set before myself was not what I should have done, and I can repent of that and try to correct the course. Or I just decide I don't care. I don't care where this path leads. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens to me or anybody else. I've chosen it and I'm going with it. That's Saul. Saul has chosen a path and he doesn't care who gets knocked around or dies because of the path he's chosen.
See, that's what Saul did in the beginning. He made the same mistake that Jonathan did. Yeah. Jonathan did it on his own. Saul did it on his own when he offered sacrifice. Yeah. I won't do it.
And we can make the same mistake. It maybe not in the same magnitudes, obviously, but the same consequences or similar consequences can occur if we become so stubborn that I don't care. I don't care who gets hurt. I don't care what people think. You know, think about that statement. I thought about that when I was thinking about ways to make this practical for us. And I thought, how many times have we said that? I don't care what people think. Well, I get that. There's some application of that. That idea is okay in the sense that if you're talking about I'm going to stand for God regardless of what the world thinks, okay, that works. But sometimes it's not about I'm going to stand for God and I don't worry about the world thinks. Sometimes is I'm going to do what I want to do and I don't care what anybody thinks. And I don't care who I have to cross, or I don't care who gets in harm's way because of it. That's Saul. And that's the mistakes he's making that's leading greater and greater consequences. And he is so stubborn and so determined that he just refuses to relent from this path he's taking. And now he's put his own son under a death decree.
It's more
because
about
of it.
saving faith than his
Yeah. He's more interested in making sure he doesn't lose the honor of the king than doing what's right in the eyes of God. But the fact of the matter is, well, if you add verse 45, and the people said unto Saul, shall Jonathan die, who hath wrought this great salvation in Israel? You mean to tell me he was over there putting the Philistines down? He's over there winning the battle while we were over here in camp looking, watching what was going on. And now you're going to put him to death as he comes back into camp and you find out he happened to be the one who ate a little bit of honey along the road. The people who Saul in his mind wants to keep their honor, the people look at Saul and say, we're not honoring you. We're not going to honor that. Yeah. And it's led him to greater and greater difficulties. God forbid, they said. As the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground. For he hath wrought with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan that he die not. Now, it's interesting how finally it clicks into people's minds that they've got to stand up. They've got to stand up to Saul. They didn't stand up to him when he forbid them to eat. They didn't stand up to him when he makes this decree about, I'm going to figure out who caused this problem and they're going to die. And everybody was afraid to answer him and tell him what had happened and what was going on. Finally, it took this for them to finally stand up to Saul and say, no more. And we will protect Jonathan. Not one hair on his head will fall to the ground. For he's done the work of God this day. And so the people rescued Jonathan. Sometimes in the face of the challenge, sometimes we need to be willing to stand up for folks who are striving to do what's right, and they're engaged in what is right, and they're being challenged by men like Saul. And sometimes the encampment needs to come and rally around the one who's not being treated fairly and justly. And finally, though it took them quite a long time to get to that point, they finally get there, where they finally come to Jonathan's aid and say, Saul, you'll do none of these things. You'll do none of these things. What Proverbs 16:18 say about pride? It's in your lesson. It's question 3. Yeah, pride comes before destruction. We learned Sunday that Saul finds out early in his reign that he's not going to be king in perpetuity. His throne's going to run out. All of those first 3 reigns ran about how long, by the way? About 4 years, right? Saul, David, and Solomon. And though there were several years where he continued to reign, God's promise was you'll not have the throne. It's going to leave your family to somebody else. And it has had a negative effect upon Saul. And he just keeps digging in further and further in the challenges. But I did appreciate the fact that finally somebody stood up and does the right thing as it relates to Jonathan. And all the pride that Saul had exhibited comes to consequence. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Do you think that God considered Saul as a physical king, a physical law of kingship, even though he had already taken the king away spiritually from him?
I mean, he's still ruling as king.
But he's not taking the physical law of a king. In other words, at this point in time, the physical king lives as king until he dies. Then his children are heirs. And when he was killed himself. And Jonathan and 2 other sons was killed before he killed himself because his armor bearer wouldn't take his life for him. But the 4th son, Ishbosheth, reigned for 2 years due to after. Do you think that God recognized this physical law of kingship? Why he didn't physically remove him from the king?
Yeah. My initial answer, maybe is in relating to something else I'm going to mention here in a minute. I didn't pursue that's not my point in this study, Bob. So I didn't pursue those kinds of discussions. I wasn't looking when I studied these texts about historical factors. I'm thinking more about what the practical side of this. So I didn't give that any particular thought.
Samuel says, at this stage, the kingship is
In the quick, and again, I didn't even pursue that kind of study with it because that's not my angle in this study. I'm thinking more in how can we learn from these moments. But I think God can say, I've taken something from you when it happened years later. Because God understands what's happened today and what's going to happen tomorrow and what happened. Time's irrelevant to him, to God. And so he can make statements like that. And he can allow a king to continue to reign in the physical sense. But still in its realities, that kingship is over in the minds of God because he knows what's coming. And so from that perspective, yes, God can leave a man in a physical kingship, but knows very well the very moment in time in which that's going to be gone. And so he can speak of it as already been taken away from him. But I think he let him rule. He continued to rule. He's still in charge of the people. He's still in charge of the armies. He still rules over God's people.
Right, the thing he really took away from him, you hear so much today from the son of David. Well, it should have been the son of Saul running back through that. So he wasn't a man after God's heart. So he stopped him and started out with David, a man after God's heart.
And he starts the process in a sense over again in that regard. And with that too, I think sometimes we can get caught up back to the issue of pride as it relates to Proverbs 16:18 and Saul's character. Saul just keeps reacting without giving thought to the choices and decisions and things that he's making. Sometimes the best response I can give is I don't know. I don't know is better than giving a misinformed answer. And that's not always easy for us because sometimes we would prefer to say something or give some answer. But sometimes, I think a lesson I feel like I've learned from Saul is that sometimes you're better off just simply saying at this moment, I don't know. I don't know. Why didn't God answer him when he asked if he could go to battle? So, rather than saying, I'm going to make a decree, I'm going to figure out which man caused this and he's going to die because of it and I don't care if it's my own son. No, Saul should have just said, I don't know. At this moment, I don't know. And greater patience could have been observed. But Saul's reacting in his misinformation, and he's making decisions and choices without the right kind of knowledge and information necessary to make quality decisions. And you and I can make the same mistakes sometimes. We're determined to have an answer for something, or we're determined to have some kind of result or reaction to something. And we're willing to make decisions even when we're misinformed, even when we don't have all the facts, even when we don't have all the knowledge that's before us. And I'm not talking about being inquisitive about something, but I'm talking about choices and decisions that we make that are misinformed. We tell people things as though it's fact. And we're as misinformed as the day is long about that. That's Saul. That's a man not after God's own heart, that makes choices and decisions not based in knowledge and not based in things that he can evidence, but he's making just choices and decisions based on his pride, his arrogance, his self-will, and everything else about his character that's flawed. And that's Saul's major hurdle that he keeps creating greater problems for himself.
Pride will also have a tendency to let others down to the point where they can't depend on you.
Yeah.
But does it seem that it goes back to the fundamental issue of faithlessness and fear? I mean, when you look at chapter 13 in the sacrifice, it was almost like a lack of faith. Where is God? Where is Samuel? The people are leaving. I'm afraid they're going to be scattered. I'm afraid that I'm going to be left alone. I'm afraid. And so that fear moved him to do something, a faithless act, which God condemned later. In chapter 14, it's Jonathan who goes by faith to fight the Philistines while Saul sits back almost, it seems to be, paralyzed in fear. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should go. I don't know if I... And for whatever reason, why he doesn't inquire of God to begin with, like Jonathan, you know, if the Lord is with us, here's how we're going to know. You know, but the Lord can do, and so you have this fear and this faithlessness. And then when Samuel says the kingdom has been taken from you, God's looking for a man after his own, or you know, found a man after his own heart. That just increases the fear, which causes more faithlessness. But it's that fear, I think, that even motivates these foolish things. I'm afraid I'm going to lose the kingdom, so I'm going to do this. I'm afraid that Jonathan is going to, you know, win the battle, so I'm going to go now, finally. I'm afraid that this is going to happen. And it's almost like the fundamental issue with Saul was a faithlessness that breeded fear that bred more faithlessness.
And once you want, and that's what, when we talked earlier about, he's got to make a decision about whether he's. I thought I'd let him go, entertaining himself apparently. But I bet people at home even heard that through the microphone. But anyway, you're right, and he's. And again, he's got to make a choice. Am I going to accept what God has said and try to improve my own personal accountability, or am I just going to keep walking this path? And that's the struggle he's in. And he just keeps compounding the problems.
But it's that fear, I think, just breeded that pride. I'm afraid of what the people think, so I'm going to take a stand. I'm afraid of this, so I'm going to do this. You know, and it's based in fear and faithlessness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
Yeah. Jump to question 5, because we discussed question 4 several weeks ago in a different study. He said Saul was sent to conquer the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15. How did he assess his own performance, and where had he fallen short? And so what's the basic instruction? Go destroy it all of it. Okay, that's the basic instruction given to him there in chapter 15. Is to go take care of all of it. When he's asked about it, what did he say? Yeah, I fulfilled the commands of God. I did it. Yes. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. But the problem is, what had he actually done? And the king. So he brought the best of the animals, and he brought King Agag back with him. And we can make the same mistake Saul made sometimes of assuming that God really didn't mean what he said. Saul was somehow in his own mind concluded that God really didn't mean what he said, or that I can manipulate what God said, or I don't have to fulfill all of what God said in order to meet his approval. But that's not the case. God would demand of Saul and of me to fulfill all of what God has asked in order to reap the benefits. And we can make the same mistakes of assuming God's got some leeway when he makes those statements. All right. Lesson 3 on Sunday. I mentioned the other day, if you weren't in the class when I first introduced this, my plan is to just go ahead so you'll know what lesson we're on, because I'm moving on. Every lesson, if I don't get all the questions done, I'll talk about those subjects another time. And so we're moving on every class. So lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3 on Sunday, and so on. So you'll always know where we're at.